I apologize for the ambient noise in this car video. Unlike many car videos, the windows are down. It's hot here. For some reason, I find myself in a lawn sleeve hoodie. Um, but nonetheless, inspired action calls, folks. I gotta make a car video for you. Um, this will be an interesting one, perhaps, or perhaps not. Um, Maggie, aka Neville Goddess, got an email recently, and she was discussing the email with me, and she said, it would be interesting to have people emailing us questions, and then we both respond to the question, but we don't know what we're gonna say before we post the video. So I didn't, see this. I don't know the specifics of this question, but the general parameters. She's like, it'll be interesting if you answered a question like this. She's like, because I'm going to make a video about this. And if you made a video about this too. And I said, that's a pretty damn good idea. So that's what this video is going to be about. And if you want a question answered by both Maggie and I, separately, without us knowing what the other person's going to say, there's a chance we're going to do more of this. So you can email me if that interests you, if you have a question you would like us both to answer. But the general question that Maggie, and again, I don't know all the specifics, but the general question was a good one that Maggie had, and this is why this discussion started. It's something that I feel like Maggie has spoken about a lot, and that I've only spoken about occasionally, and I have a feeling we're going to have very different answers to it. But I hope the person who originally wrote Maggie perhaps gets something out of this, and more so I hope that people who have had similar questions like this get something out of the answer I'm going to provide. The question basically, I think, was if you had like a bad self-concept for a long time, or when you were growing up, why did good things happen to you? The specifics that I know of in this situation were like this woman, when she was younger, she was saying that she had a tough upbringing. It sounded, from what Maggie told me, that she had kind of like a traumatic type of upbringing. And then I guess she was in high school or maybe college or something like that, and she had more traumatic stuff happen to her, including what sounded to be like some kind of essentially sexual assault. And that she was kind of in like the depths of despair. Her self-concept was worse than ever. And at that point, she met her future husband, who is still her husband like 15 years later. And that her husband stayed with her, even though she exhibited and tried all this behavior to confirm her self-concept at the time, which is somebody that should not be loved, that does not deserve to be with someone who is loving to them. Nonetheless, her future husband stayed by her side and kind of nourished her and helped her and was a loving partner for her, and continues to be a loving partner towards her, a decade and a half or whatever later. And in that ensuing time frame, this woman who was writing Maggie, her own self-concept has greatly improved. So she was wondering, how is this that even with such a shitty self-concept, basically, right, that this wonderful thing happened to me? Why is that? It's a great question. Great question for this new series of Ask Maggie and Tim at the same time, and see what kind of answers we come up with. So I would say my general answer, first of all, most people familiar with this channel would know this already. My general answer is everybody is different. And what pertains to one person does not necessarily pertain to the other person. And one thing that I think I might defer from a lot of people in the LOA space is that, people say laws, like, this idea of self-concept and like the law of belief, even like they're hard and firm things. I just don't see that. You know, I did a short playlist, video series, I don't know, like a half year ago or something like that, about the law of belief, as Joseph Murphy liked to call it. And it talked about how belief obviously seems like the main driving force in so much of this manifesting stuff, right? What you believe yourself to be, what you believe will happen, has a tendency to happen. But the last video in that short series, and I'll link above and below to that playlist, that the last video was talking about what happens when you don't believe and it still does happen, or what happens when you do believe and it does not happen. And especially if we get outside of these wacky LOA circles, we can think of so many examples where that's the case. Things are not cut and dry. The idea of self-concept is one that I rarely discuss explicitly. Like, I hardly ever use that term, self-concept, because almost all these ideas are about self-concept. But the idea that there's like this certain self-concept, and the same idea that there's like the law of assumption or the law of belief or the law of whatever, is just, that's getting too heady, too intellectual, too theoretical about it. Weird stuff happens all the time, and I do not think we're going to have a good explanation for why weird stuff happens all the time. Now, this situation, I'm not saying it's weird. It's very interesting, and I think it lends itself where, this woman said she had a poor self-concept, and a great thing happened to her. It lends itself to a few things. One thing it lends itself to, and I made a video about this last year, and I'll link above and below to this as well, is often when we've had that dark night of the soul type thing. And, so many LOA teachers talk about this. You go through this really harrowing thing, this traumatic event, or this traumatic decade, or this traumatic childhood. And you hit basically what seems like bottom. You give up, almost. It's only at that point that you're resurrected. That happens time and time again. We see that across so many stories, and, it's almost like an archetype or an arc that we see happen all the time. So perhaps in this situation it's a little bit like that. And when we're at our most desperate and our lowest point, sometimes then is when the magic happens. We let go enough. We say, I don't know what to do. For seemingly our personality is dropped enough at that point for God to fill in the pieces, for God to fill in the space, and provide you with exactly what you need, which you consciously never could have conceived of, or even imaginatively never could have conceived of such a good solution. But often we have to come down to our knees to even realize that. It seems like, at least. And so that, that might have something to do with this. The future husband was, God shining through at that moment of real pain, suffering, dark night of the soul type stuff. We hear that all the time. And something else that comes to mind is this life-giving principle. In LOA we hear it, like I think Murphy talks about, he calls it the life-giving principle, but we see it across so much LOA stuff, like, the principle of life is what's natural, right? Principle. Goldsmith talks a lot about this. Goldsmith mentions Mary Baker Eddy, Christian Science, like this idea of life word. We're naturally life-giving. Life is giving to us. It's giving us health, love, peace, wealth, naturally. And we hide it with our delusions. We cover it up with our delusions, but it's naturally already there. And so perhaps in this case, that natural life-giving force, which was always there, but had been shrouded for so many years, that force finally presented itself in that moment of need, almost like a survival mechanism. Sometimes the survival mechanism takes over when we're at our most desperate. And what's interesting is you can have somebody as non-LOAE who talks about this stuff, like Yuji Krishnamurti, and he talks about the infinite intelligence of the body. I don't know if he says infinite, but the intelligence of the body. Yuji Krishnamurti always said, like, the body knows what to do. We get in the way of letting the body function intelligently. That's very similar in a way to what a lot of these LOA teachers are saying. It's just stripped down. So maybe in that awful place of agony, mental agony, something knew what to do, whether it was the body, whether it was, this life word force that reigns in the subconscious, and presented itself, as this person's husband, future husband. But my point here, I think what the larger point here, one of the points here, is that this is why an idea, a theory like self-concept, while it can be very helpful, often limits us in this space. Because people think, oh, this is my self-concept, and I'm in control of everything, and my self-concept's not good, I'm not going to get this, so my self-concept has to be good. I'm not saying this is what happened to this woman. But any concept is limiting. Any concept is a limiting belief in and of itself, strangely. You understand what I'm saying? God is not limited. So if you look at it that way, you say healing is not limited. Your manifestations are not limited by what we can conceive of rationally or even imaginatively, you could say, along those lines. So I don't know. I don't know if this will help the woman at all, if she's going to even see this, who initially asked Maggie that question. But I hope it helps some of you watching. Kind of a far-out interpretation, I think, of that question. If you have questions for me, you can email me at info@radicalcounselor.com or contact me on my website at radicalcounselor.com. Till next time.